Hi, you're listening to Book Chat with author Vivian E. Moore.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello and welcome to Book Chat. I am your host, author Vivian E. Moore. Hope everyone had a great week and I hope that you're having an even better weekend. All right, we're going to get straight to today's show. The title is Practice Makes Perfect, and the topic is the fear of failure, an author's perspective. All right, so growing up, my mother would often remind me of those three words, especially when she thought I wasn't trying my best. My mother believed that I was capable of doing better. To her, the formula, it was simple. And, to her, it was like if you dedicated your mind and time to something, you could achieve it. And, that philosophy, it seeped into me the way that I view challenges today and all those opportunities and eventually my writing. But as I grew older and as I stepped into this uncertain world of storytelling and publishing, it helped me to realize that there was another truth that walked beside me. And most authors, they probably can identify with this, and that is the fear of failure. And it just does not apply to authors. It applies to anyone who has a career that they love or something that they love doing. And maybe they haven't stepped out on that faith yet because, they fear that they will fail at it. And chances are you will fail, the first maybe 1 through 10 times that you try. But I think the thing is that we don't stop. We keep going. Okay. Despite having that fear of failure, we can't let that stop us. Okay. Because failure, it is a word that carries weight, especially for creatives. It isn't just about not reaching a goal because it feels so personal, right? So when we write, we don't just arrange words on the paper. We pour pieces of ourselves onto those pages, and to have that rejected or ignored or misunderstood, it can definitely feel like the deepest kind of failure. Okay, but in so many ways, it is this very fear that keeps us returning to the page, trying again and practicing, and if we are brave enough, growing into that stronger version of ourselves. Okay, so what does failure look like? Well, especially to an author, failure, it doesn't wear just one face. It shifts and it changes depending on where you are in your writing journey. And sometimes it can start with that blank page, because sometimes failure, it looks like that you're not starting at all. That fear of not being good enough, it can keep us paralyzed and just staring at an empty document. All right. So the next thing is the rough draft. How many times have we gone through that? And other times, it's writing something that feels clumsy or just uninspired. It's just that you're just putting words on the paper and hoping that they will rearrange themselves into something that looks like that you're trying to impress someone, if not yourself. And then you have to convince yourself that it is proof that you are not cut out for this. Don't do that. Okay? It's just a rough draft. And then if you get past all of that, the next thing is those rejection letters to those authors who send their work out to publishing companies. Because for those who do pursue that traditional publishing, there's always that sting of, we regret to inform you. Yes, you've seen those words. They first start out with something that is very flattering, and then the next thing, they want to sort of let you down easily before they go in for the kill. But anyway, you may have hundreds of those stacked in your inbox, and and they may look like evidence against your dream, but don't think of it that way. And then the next thing is, once you have conquered that fear of all of those rejection letters, then there comes the silence. And especially for self-published authors, because failure may look like releasing your book into the world only to hear silence in return. No sales, no reviews, which equals no validation. But that's not true. Even though each version of failure, it feels so uniquely painful, but at their core, they all stem from the same hunting question: what if I'm not enough? So let me just tell you, you are enough. Okay, so I want to talk about the myth of perfection. And here's the problem with practice makes perfect. I'm not saying that what my mother said wasn't true, because it was much so very true. But as children, we often take it literally. And let me tell you something, I did. Because we imagine that perfection means flawlessness, right? Getting it right every time, and then reaching a point where mistakes no longer exist. But as an adult, and especially as a writer, I've come to realize that perfection does not mean flawless. We're humans, right? We are not perfect by anyone's standards, and that means that we all have flaws. Okay, so instead of perfection, how about just being persistent? Because it's about showing up when that blank page feels intimidating. It's about writing all of those messy drafts and then rewriting them until they shine. Okay, and then it's about sending out those queries even when rejections are more common than responses. And then it's about pressing publish despite the knot of fear in your stomach. It's like you don't want to send it, but you just have to. So you have to get over that fear of being rejected, because perfection isn't the absence of failure. It is the willingness to keep practicing through failure. Okay, so how can fear become a teacher? Well, the fear of failure doesn't have to be an enemy. In fact, it can be one of our greatest teachers if we learn to listen. Because fear often points to what matters most to us. Okay, and if I'm afraid of failing at writing, it's because writing it holds that deep value in my life, okay, that it's a part of me. And so that worries me that I may fail at something that I love. That fear, it signals love and passion and purpose, okay? So, when I shift my perspective, failure becomes less of a threat and more of a stepping stone, okay? Because each failed draft, it taught me something. It taught me something new about my style. And each rejection, it built resilience in me, because each moment of silence after a book release, that it reminded me that success is built slowly, one reader at a time. Okay, so fear sharpens us if we allow it to. All right, so let's talk about practical ways to face the fear of failure as a writer. Well, over time, I've learned that some strategies that helps me to embrace that fear instead of letting it paralyze me, especially if you're an author or you are someone who is trying and you're struggling with this same battle. And so I hope that what we're talking about can help you with that. And the first thing that I want to talk about is how to redefine success, because success does not always mean bestseller list or thousands of sales. Okay. Sometimes success is just finishing a story and then sharing it with one person or improving from your last draft. Okay. And the second thing is you need to treat writing as practice, because again, practice does make perfect. It may not be perfect. It may not be flawless, but it will be better than the last time you tried. Okay. So remind yourself that every piece of writing is part of your practice. And even if no one else reads it, you're still sharpening your skill. And that alone should make it worthwhile. And the third thing is you need to separate self-worth from output. Okay. Rejections and low sales or negative feedback, they do not define your worth as a writer or as a human being. Okay. Because they are only reflections of circumstances, not your value. Okay. And then you need to seek community. We talk about community a lot on this show. I've done so many episodes that are just filled with that, because community is so necessary. And sharing your fears with other writers, it can be freeing. Okay. So, you'll discover that you're not alone too. And that fear of failure is universal. You are not the only person that is experiencing that. Okay. If you are human, you have experienced that fear. All right. So sometimes you need that encouragement from your peers, because when you can share those experiences, it can lighten the load so much more. Okay. And then, guys, you need to celebrate all of those small wins. Okay. So if you wrote a page today, that's a win. If you finished a draft, that's a win. And progress is made in inches and not leaps. Okay. So it's one of the reasons why we keep writing anyway, because failure, it is terrifying. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and gaslight you about it, because it is terrifying, but we still keep writing despite that, right? And the reason for that is because the love of the craft is stronger than the fear of failure. Okay. So, writing alone, it allows us to give shape to our thoughts and to tell those stories that might resonate with others, and to leave a piece of ourselves behind, because, every time we choose to write, despite that fear, we're saying that our voice matters. And you know what? It does. Okay. So maybe my mother's words, they took a new meaning on practice makes perfect. And what I've learned is that it isn't about being flawless. It's about showing up with courage again and again, even when your fear is loud. So here are my closing thoughts on it. As authors, we carry the fear of failure. And again, it is universal, it's human, and it is part of the process. But failure is not the opposite of success. It is a stepping stone toward it. Okay. So the truth is, the only way to truly fail as a writer is to stop writing altogether. Okay. So every page written, every draft that is finished, every story shared is proof that fear hasn't won. So all my fellow writers out there, keep practicing, keep showing up, keep letting your words take shape, because fear will always be there, but so will your passion. And in the end, passion will carry you further than fear ever could. All right. So that is the show for today. And as I always say, remember to tell those who you care about the most how you feel about them, because tomorrow is not promised. It may be the only chance you get to say it. So on that note, I love you. I hope you love me back. And until the next time you hear my voice, God bless you and goodbye.
Loved what you've heard on this week's episode? Well, the answer is simple. It would mean the world to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and achieve even greater things. Thank you.